Hello, Halie Devlin. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm so glad that we are connecting in this way.
Me too. Thank you
Yay.
so much for having me.
Hey, thank you. I'm going to pull a card for us from my energy center crystal chakra type deck. And so the card might be for you or for me. It could inform the conversation or it could not, or it could be for someone listening. It's always fun.
Love
I'm
it.
just going to shuffle. And I'm going to pick. Oh, beauty and the I don't know how to pronounce it. Charoit. I'll show you. I don't know what crystal that is, but it's beauty.
I've never seen that.
It helps you stay in the moment while supporting clear thinking. You are able to come to decisions faster. It naturally infuses the energies of beauty and abundance.
Love that.
Ooh, yeah. Does that resonate with you at all today?
Totally. Yeah. It's funny. I was just listening to a podcast episode actually that John O'Donohue did with Krista Tippett on being. And I don't know if you are familiar with his work or not, but he wrote some incredible books. He passed away several years ago, but he was just a deeply spiritual and inspiring human being. And he was talking in the episode about beauty being like really a necessity, and how I think we often think of it as a luxury, but actually that like intentionally orienting to the beauty that surrounds us is like a deeply spiritual practice. And so when you pulled that, I just was like, oh yes, it just felt like another kind of like reminder of the importance of bringing beauty into our lives, and not even bringing it in, but just like being aware that it's already there,
Oh, I love how you're seeing that. I think I saw it in a different way, which is that when I first started recording videos for the podcast, I would like get really dulled up because I felt really insecure. And then today I was like, no. And so I was kind of thinking like, I don't need to be beautiful, like to be seen. But now that I hear you say that, it's more like, I'm already inherently beautiful. And also so is everything else.
Totally. Yes, so true.
I love that. What a great start to our episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I would love to dive in maybe with authenticity.
Yeah.
That's my word of the year. So I see that's part of your bios, part of what you help people do or come back to. So I would love to hear your thoughts on it, authenticity.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I feel like it could be a whole episode in and of itself, probably. But authenticity, I think, is such a vital part of the way that I get to live my life now. And really it's a result of my recovery, but I guess I'll share a little bit about like, I think before I entered into recovery, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more, but all to say, I lived a lot of my life being very inauthentic and just in trying to be who I thought other people needed me to be in order to get my needs met and to feel loved and to feel like I belonged. But the thing that I didn't really realize until, I'd already been living that way for most of my life is that in continually needing to be who I thought other people needed me to be, and therefore being inauthentic, I was really betraying my own capacity to belong to myself, and I think that it's natural to have that need to want to belong and to try to kind of mold ourselves to fit in a sense. That's like pretty like normal human relational dynamics. And I think that there's often a degree to which we do it to our detriment and that causes so much harm, and so, when I got sober, authenticity wasn't really something that I was trying actively to do, but I found that the more I committed to my recovery, which is to say, a huge part of recovery is just like being honest with myself, being honest with other people about what's happening for me, about what I'm feeling, about what I need, about what I want or don't want. That honesty developed in me a natural capacity to live an authentic life, and it's been such an interesting journey too. Like, we met on Instagram, which is so cool. And I'll name for myself that like I've been in the field of wellness for 6+ years. And it took me like 5 years to get to a place where I was willing to be like totally open, honest, and constantly communicating and recovering out loud, and so I also feel like everybody kind of has their own path and journey with what authenticity gets to be about and look like. But I know for me, like, I love that I get to be in a place where, both in my personal life and in the world of social media, I feel really committed to authenticity. But it's definitely taken time to get there, and I've done it first in like small situations, and then developed a capacity to feel safe doing it in those situations, and then that's allowed me to move into like kind of I don't want to say bigger and bigger, but like different arenas, and feel safe doing it there too.
Oh, I love everything of what you just said.
Mm.
One thing that struck me for myself in my own kind of journey, and you said that it like changes, and then we go through phases and come back to phases with authenticity. But I feel like I went through a big like F you world part of my authenticity. So there
Mhm.
had to be like a swinging of the pendulum of being like
Yeah.
aggressively authentic to
Yeah,
being
yeah.
like very passively authentic or like
Mm,
inauthentic. And now I'm kind
mm.
of like finding the middle ground a little bit.
Totally, totally. Yeah, and I do think that it's like a middle road,
Mm.
in so many ways, and so much of it is about like, what is my intention in sharing this authentic thing right now, and and for me, I have to continuously ask myself, like, am I sharing this thing and it's authentic, but I maybe don't feel, but it still feels tender, right? I think Brene Brown talks about this, where she says like, not everybody deserves to know every piece of your story, and if there's a piece of your story that you're still like actively working on, then sometimes it actually can be harmful to your process, because then if you receive unwanted feedback, or you receive some sort of reflection or something like that can be harmful. And so it's like, what's the balance between like, okay, yes, authenticity, and also am I giving myself the space to do that in a way that feels safe, where I know that I can be held in that authenticity with respect and with honoring. And then otherwise, like, there are parts that we can like keep, for only certain spaces, or and not at certain spaces, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's having boundaries with others and yourself too, of knowing
Totally.
what's safe for you to share and not share.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I love quoting Brene Brown too. You
Yeah,
got me hooked.
yeah. Totally. I feel like most people have that experience. She's so great.
Um, and you also said recovering out loud. I would
Mm.
love to hear what that means to you. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm in recovery. Well, I entered into recovery because of my uh, addiction to heroin and meth, and really any drug that I could get my hands on, and then also alcohol. And so that was kind of my entry into the world of recovery. And I've been clean and sober now for more than 7 years. I just had my 7th year sobriety birthday on February 1st. But I over the course of the last 7 years have come to realize that there's so much more to recovery than just the substance use, right? And so it's really like, in so many ways, like a soul recovery, and that is ever evolving, and I'm learning about myself, um and uh and healing every day, really, right? And so but all to say, when I talk about recovering out loud, what I mean is that I've committed to being really open about being in recovery from substance use and other things, because I think that and that's, a personal choice. I don't think that everybody needs to walk that path, although if people want to, I think it's so powerful, because there's so much stigma in our society around it, when the truth is that we live in the most addicted society in history. And so it's actually like one of the most normal
Yeah.
in human experiences that we have, and yet it's still, hidden away in the shadows in so many ways, and there's so much judgment around it. And because there's so much judgment around it, I think that people don't seek the help that they need, because they're afraid of that judgment. I know that was my experience for years. I wanted help, but I was just so afraid of asking for it because I didn't want people to feel a certain way, or how they felt about me change. In reality, like, I was causing so much harm through my use anyway, that when I did start to be open and honest about it, people were mostly relieved. But all to say, I'm really committed to breaking the stigma as much as possible. And so, yeah, I share really openly about recovery, and I have people, I work with folks one-on-one. I do sober coaching also. And I, last year, founded an online recovery space for women who are recovering really from any destructive behaviors. But I feel really committed to creating space for folks to recover that's really non-judgmental and really open and welcoming, because I know that is essential if people want to recover, to have that safe space. And so, yeah.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I love
Mhm.
it. And congratulations on your
Mm,
7+ years. That's amazing.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're
Mhm.
welcome. Hmm. I wanted to touch back on what you said about belonging as well, because I feel like that's really tied into the spaces that you're creating.
Mm,
Um, and I think that was part of my journey with alcohol use as well, that I've always felt like I didn't belong. And so one
yeah.
of the easiest ways to belong in a group of people that you don't feel comfortable with is to get drunk around them, because then you have that in common, your inhibitions go down. So I think it's so special too, not just for recovery, but creating a space where you can be sober and yourself too.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one of the most common ways that we're taught to connect culturally is around drinking, for sure. And I hear that again and again from folks, that feels like, it feels like climbing an uphill battle in so many ways to change, because everywhere we turn, it's like, big alcohol is marketing to us that, like, this is how we should be living, and then we're getting that reinforced through our friendship dynamics or our family dynamics, or just, all the dynamics, relational dynamics that we can be in. And yeah, that's why I again and again come back to the necessity for other recovery community, because if we feel isolated in a space where everybody has this common bond around alcohol and nobody's seeking to change that, it
Yeah.
can feel impossible to change it ourselves. And so, but then coming into a space of a community where everybody is seeking to change that and is like normalizing all of the internal experiences and feelings and realities that we're holding around this thing that's causing us so much suffering, that in and of itself is so healing. I know that was for me, like when I tried to get sober for years before I did, and in my early 20s, but I just didn't know anybody else that was sober, and so I didn't really think it was possible for me. I didn't have any idea of what it could look like to live a sober life. That wasn't modeled to me, and it wasn't until I found sober community that I was able to be like, oh, okay, if this is possible for them, then maybe it's possible for me, and started to take like direction and receive support in that way.
That's beautiful.
Mm.
Um, have you read Quit Like a Woman by Holly Whitaker?
No, but I know of it and I love her and follow her on Instagram.
She's so cool.
Mhm.
And she talks so much about big alcohol, which I didn't really, I mean, I probably knew it was a thing, but like her book really highlighted to me the ways that big alcohol teaches us that it's healthy almost to drink, not only healthy, but normal and
Totally.
expected and like sexy and fun,
Yeah.
and soothing. So there's just so many messages that we have around alcohol that we don't
Mhm.
even realize we have.
It's so true. Yeah, I'll watch a TV show now, and I'll just find it so interesting, the subtle ways, whatever, some character feeling stressed about something, it's just like, oh, I'm gonna go get the drink, and it's just like so normalized that that's how we cope with any difficult emotion, and it's so insidious that we almost don't even notice it. Yeah.
Yeah, cope and
Mhm.
celebrate too.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so interesting. And she actually talks about in her book the importance of really intentional recovering or recovery communities,
Mm,
because the typical model that's used is like, you're a piece of shit person, so you need to get better. And it's like,
yeah.
women and most people really don't need that messaging because we already feel like we're a piece of shit person.
Totally. Yeah. And that's one of the things that I love so much about Embodied Recovery Community, the community that's growing. That, you know, I always like feel sort of funny saying like, oh, I founded this community because it's really like so far beyond and not really about me at the end of the day. But all to say that it's such a special community because it is very much about holding that space where it's like actually the foundation is understanding that each of us is like inherently good and inherently divine and inherently worthy. And how do we reclaim that truth and that knowing? How do we remember that for ourselves? And so I think that, yeah, that's such an important part of having an intentional recovery community for sure.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about your community?
Yeah, definitely. So Embodied Recovery Community, like I said, is a space for any, you know, women identifying folks or anyone who's experienced the oppression of misogyny, really, right? Like non-binary, trans, everybody is welcome. But it's really about anybody who's recovering from any kind of destructive behavior. So it doesn't have to just be substance use. There's also folks who are, you know, recovering from things like codependency or food addiction or love addiction. And, you know, I personally am like in a real place of kind of decolonizing in a sense, but as much as possible, like not labeling things. And so all those things are labels, right? But for the purpose of just communicating that there's many different ways in which somebody can enter into recovery, and all of those ways are welcome in our space. I'll just say that. And then and we gather around really 4 pillars. So the first is community. And so we have gatherings every single week in the way of sharing circles, yoga and meditation. And we also have monthly ceremonies near full and new moons. And so we gather in that community space. And then we also have the second pillar, which is embodiment. And so all of our spaces are embodiment centered, which means that we are continuously coming back to and learning how to be in our bodies. I know for me, that has been a huge part of my recovery because my addiction and the way that I lived my life was all about disembodiment, being disconnected from my body, numbing, not feeling, not being connected to myself, to my needs, to my feelings. And so a huge part of recovery is learning how to engage with a wider range of emotions, with sensations, both individually and in relationship, right? And so embodiment is a really central pillar to the work that we do together. And then we also have self-reflection. So every month there's journal prompts that are centered around whatever the month's recovery theme is. Like this month, our theme is embodying commitment. And so we've just been in this exploration of what that means to embody commitment. And then our 4th pillar is service. And service, you know, is such a vital part of any recovery path. And really it's not like, I think there's a kind of patriarchal paradigm of service where it's like, oh, I'm giving to this person that's in a less, you know, in a lesser position than me or something like that. And it's like, that's not what we're doing at all. It's not a hierarchical in that way. It's very much coming from a place of mutual aid, which is just this idea that like, actually in order for me to thrive, you also need to thrive. And so how do we support that for one another? And how do we give what we can, receive what we need, and let there be this continual flow in that? And so this year we're really focusing on like, how do we deepen networks of community care within our own community in a way that's rooted in service. And so those are, the 4 pillars. And it's a really awesome space. There's women from all over the country. And it's in a really fun place right now where there's just over 40 women. So it's like, it's big enough that there's just like, it's dynamic and it's fun. And it's like small enough that folks are actually getting to know one another. I've been part of membership spaces before where like you really just feel like a floating box every time you come into a gathering because it's always different people and you don't actually really feel like you're getting to know anybody. And so it's in a fun space now where it's like folks are actually getting to know one another. And it's really special and I love it so much.
Yeah, Yeah. Wow. That is so exciting. And how long have you been doing that?
Yeah, so the community started in January of 2021. So if this is now month
Oh,
14 that it's been in existence. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Congratulations. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, mm, you said one of the main things that you work on is coming back to the idea that you're inherently worthy or inherently divine. Could
Mhm.
you maybe expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that gosh, I'm trying to feel into there's so many directions to go with expanding on this. The one that feels the most alive in me right now is that, you know, I don't know if you ever heard somebody say, I'm sure I read this somewhere, I don't remember where, but somebody once said that that addicts are just misguided seekers, right? And so like usually
Oh,
when we're in our whatever we're in, whether we want to call that call it addiction or call it something else, but we're ultimately seeking, right? Like there's a hole inside that we're trying to fill, and there's an aliveness that we're wanting to experience in some way, and when we come into recovery, it's like, okay, then the question becomes like, okay, if I'm not going to be filling the hole with this substance or this behavior or this thing, then what am I going to be filling it with? And I feel like the beautiful thing about recovery is that we start to be able to like orient to a spirituality that works for us, or something that we believe in that's divine and that is also in us, and start to turn towards that as a way to kind of like fill that hole, so to speak.
yeah.
um, and so, talking about being inherently divine, I feel like that is in and of itself is like is a deeply spiritual experience, to come to recognize like, oh, I am a child of whatever it is that I believe in that's bigger than me. And some people call that God, some people call that spirit, some people call that nature, whatever our orientation or our language is. But coming to remember that about ourselves is such an important part of the path of recovery. And so that piece feels really important. And then also just the worthiness piece. I mean, I feel like we're taught in a million different ways, being rooted in this world of capitalism that we exist in, that we need to be this way or change this thing or consume this thing in order to be worthy of love. And that it's not just a mentality, it's like it's very physiological, that desire and need to belong, and the fear that we don't, and so, but all to say that that coming to recognize that actually we've been worthy all along, and that it's not us that's the issue. It's like it's what we're swimming in, that we often don't even realize we're swimming in, because that's just how we live. It's like a fish in water doesn't realize it's in water, right? It's just been swimming in this reality for so long.
Yeah.
And to me, a huge part of recovery is like is beginning to be able to pull back that veil and be like, oh my God, there isn't anything inherently wrong with me, and actually like I'm already whole, and I'm not broken, and like I'm actually okay as I am. And it's what I've been told and fed in so many different ways, that's the thing, that's the issue. And for me, when I started to realize that, it's like that in and of itself eliminated a whole host of reasons that I wanted to drink and use. And so it's so important, to practice remembering that, and like we need other people to help us remember that too often, right? And that's also what I love about community, is just having, we're deeply interrelational beings. We just are. We need one another to thrive and to be mirrors for each other. And when we can have that space to have somebody reflect to us our inherent goodness, instead of what, culture and consumerism and media and marketing and all these things, and maybe even family dynamics and other relational dynamics might be reflecting to us, like when we can have somebody that can hold that space of reflection for our inherent worth, like that is so profoundly healing. And so, yeah, I feel like there's probably so much more I could say about it, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. And that reminds me of our card too. We're inherently
Yeah.
beautiful as
Mm-hmm.
well. Oh, I love that.
Totally.
I know that's so challenging because we're taught in every single sphere, in every part of our lives almost, that we're not worthy.
Yeah.
Whether it's capitalism, like us producing something or us consuming something, and so much more. It must be so challenging. Yeah, what is your path to feeling worthy and feeling, like self-lovable, I guess?
Yeah, I love that question. Yeah, I mean, the journey of self-love has been an arduous one for me. When I first got sober, if you were to ask me like to orient to self-love, I just had no concept of what that could even possibly feel like. I had mostly self-loathing, honestly. And so I began with like self-friendliness, which is really like in so many ways a Buddhist practice. Like I could orient to being friendly towards myself, that I could feel in my body. I could understand, I could wrap my mind around how that could be possible, where it's like, oh, I can start to talk to myself internally the way that I would a friend, or I could be curious about my experience the way that I would be curious with a friend, instead of like judgmental and really critical and harsh. And so it started like that for me. And then, slowly over time, I think another big part of recovery is learning how to live in alignment with my values and my integrity. And, there's a saying that's like, if you want to build self-esteem, then do esteemable acts. And so I would do that. I would just I would be of service to others. I would show up when I said I was going to show up, like really seemingly simple things that for me were like huge leaps in growth, because I had so much of a tendency towards like avoidance and running and freezing. And so, starting to just like keep my promises to myself, to other people, and to do things and to make choices very intentionally, even if they terrified me, that were in alignment with who I wanted to be in the world. And I didn't do any of that in a vacuum. Like I had support, and I'm privileged and very fortunate to have the support that I've had. But I was able to start to, day by day, be making these different choices that were ultimately moving me towards life rather than away from it, right? And in doing so, over time, I started to develop self-esteem and be like, oh, okay, I like that I handled things that way, or I like that I communicated that to that person. I like that I showed up to this thing even though I didn't want to, and then I actually had a great time, And so slowly but surely, I started to feel that sense of being proud of myself, of being proud of the way that I was moving through the world, of making those choices that were in alignment with my integrity, and then self-esteem grew from there. And then in that, I developed a capacity to experience self-love. And I mean, I don't want to make any sort of illusions that I've like got that totally dialed in and never experienced things like self-judgment and self-criticism, because I certainly do. And I genuinely do love myself so much more than I ever have. And I really share that only just to like, I know for me, when I'm on a path and a concept feels new, it's like nice to hear that it's possible from other people. So I share that just to say that like, I'm not special in any way, and so if it's possible for me, then it's certainly possible for anybody who is maybe listening or seeking that.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I like starting with self-friendliness. And I totally agree with you that when I first heard people talking about self-love, I really thought that was BS. I was like, they're just saying that, but there's no way they actually love themselves, because that's impossible. And so I like that you broke it down. Like, you don't have to go from self-loathing to self-love. You can kind of climb your way there, and it's not going to be linear either. You're going to go all over the place.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's so funny too. I was thinking about the self-esteem expression that you shared like 2 days ago. That's so funny.
Oh, funny. Yeah, I love that quote. It's such a good one.
Yeah, I know. Oh, and you talked about values and integrity.
Mm.
And I feel like that was another one that when I started hearing the word values, I was like, nah. Like I don't know what that is and I don't need to do that.
Yes, yes,
What was
yeah.
your journey to figuring out your values?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's an ongoing journey, right? And that they're ever evolving and shifting, and really my I think of my role as like, am I available to life as it's unfolding? And if I am, then more is constantly being revealed and directing me to examine what it is that I value or should be valuing, need to be valuing. And so I don't think by any means that's a fixed thing, but I'll say that, yeah, I totally relate to your experience of being like, well, I don't know, what is that really, and I think that, interestingly, in Embodied Recovery Community this month, with our theme of embodying commitment, I think a lot of times when we think of commitment, we think of like the things that we're committed to, right? In our life, like the external things,
Yeah.
which are certainly, commitments, but also it's like, if we're connected to our values, then that enforce or in what's the word that I'm looking for? It informs how we commit to things, and we can commit more intentionally. What I hear often and over again, both in working with folks one-on-one and in community spaces, and even just, my personal relationships, is like, everybody actually feels overcommitted for the most part.
Yeah.
But I think that part of that can be because we actually aren't clear on what it is that we value. And so we're saying yes to everything, because we don't actually know how to prioritize what truly matters to us, right? And so when we come to this question of values, it's like, for me, it often is, it's both larger vision values, overarching everyday life values, and also sometimes day to day. But an example that comes to mind is like, I used to constantly be experiencing burnout, because I was overcommitting to so many things. And then I had to ask myself, like, what am I valuing right now? And the truth is like, I was valuing the constant need to say yes, to feel okay and to feel safe, right? Like, that's what my actions are reflecting that I'm valuing, as opposed to valuing rest and living cyclically, right? And so I had to say to myself, and I feel like, yeah, you probably have so much to share about this. I love how even just like your emails and stuff, I'm like, been so appreciating how you are cyclically oriented. But anyway, I'll just say that I had to really get honest with myself, like, okay, what am I choosing to value right now? And if I want to value living like a balanced life where I feel restored and enlivened by the things that I'm doing instead of burned out, then I need to start to value rest more. And in doing so, in orienting to valuing rest, valuing living cyclically, that then informed what I was committing to, because I had to really check in with myself and feel like, oh, do I actually have capacity for this thing? Or am I tired? Am I spread thin? Am I overstretched? And is this thing going to put me into a place of feeling overstretched? And if that's the case, then I have to come back to valuing rest. And that means that I have to say no to this thing. And so that's just like one example, right, of exploring what it is that we value and letting our values inform how we're moving through the world. I could expand more on it if you wanted to, but
yeah, I would love that.
yeah. And then I think that there's also, for me, just like some overarching things that I value. One of them is valuing family and quality time, right? And so again, it's like, I have to be really clear within myself about that on a daily basis. Because if I'm not, then inevitably the waves of life will sway me in another direction. And then I feel like I'm not living in alignment with my own needs. I start to develop things like resentment and stuff like that. And none of that is helpful, right? And so it's like, okay, what am I valuing right now? What are my highest values? And so certainly like family and my close and nourishing friendships that are chosen family in so many ways is like something that I deeply value. I also deeply value somatics as paradigm, embodiment as paradigm, and I'm committed to bringing that work into the world because I think that is so vital if we are hoping to make the change that I know that so many of us have been working for, wanting to see in the world. And so I feel deeply committed to somatics as paradigm, and that's part of my value system, and so every day it's like I get to ask myself, am I living in alignment with that? Am I staying connected to my body? Am I turning in the direction of my body when something is difficult, or am I running? Am I trying to numb out in some other way? Substances aren't an issue for me anymore. I never have a desire to drink or use, but I can numb out with Netflix. I can numb out with social media. Like there's a million ways that we can still numb out on things, right? And so again, it's like this question of, okay, what am I valuing in this moment? What am I committed to as far as my values go on a day-to-day basis? And how can I very lovingly and not judgmentally, but just like be in a continuous inquiry of that. Like, how do I come back into alignment with what matters most to me right now?
Oh, I love everything you just said.
Mm.
Where to start? One thing I've been thinking a lot about is the idea of consent with ourselves. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with the body, but also like what we're saying yes and what we're saying no to.
Yeah.
And is something a full bodied yes, or is your body saying no and you're saying yes, or is your body saying no and your mind is saying yes?
Yeah.
Or like the part of you that wants praise, is that saying yes when your soul is saying no? And so like trying to find that in myself to give more embodied yeses and embodied nos.
Yes.
It's also so hard to say no. It's so hard.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's that. I feel like that could be a whole conversation, but I love what you're talking about an embodied yes and an embodied no. And that's one of the millions of reasons that I love embodiment work, because I think that when we're not always, I can be connected to my body and still say yes when I mean no, but when I am more connected to my body, I often have more of a capacity to pause, because and you just named it, right? Like we know when something's a no. We feel that in our bodies, where it's just like there's a contraction and it's just like, ugh, like that's not what I want to be doing, and yet if we're not accustomed to making decisions that are directed from an inward place versus an external one, then we're going to be so much more likely to say yes instead of honoring that no internally. And so embodiment as a paradigm and a practice for me grants me the space to be able to at least pause and check in first before I answer, and then if it feels like a no, sometimes I'm able to say the no. Sometimes I can feel that despite the fact that it's a no, I'm afraid to say no to the person. So something that I've learned to do is say, I'm going to have to think about that or look at my calendar or whatever, and I'll get back to you. So that generates some kind of a little bit more of a pause. And then in that space where there's in a more ample pause, then I can really be like kind of mentally prepare to be like, okay, I'm going to say no to this person. I'll whatever, call them again, or send a text, or just whatever the thing. But like there's like a little bit more wiggle room, I feel like. And there are still some moments where I feel the no and I say yes, but at least now when I do that, I can be aware that that's what's happening for me. And really, like, that's such an issue for me of like, oh, I don't feel safe enough in this dynamic to say no. And so I get to be curious about why that is for me, and hold hold that impulse with so much compassion, because I think that's such a survival impulse, right? Where it's like we need to feel that sense of belonging, and we can be afraid that if we say the no, that will be stripped from us. And like that, yeah, that just lets us know like, oh, there's some space to do some work around this still, and that's beautiful.
Yeah. 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 I like that you're really taking away the judgment from that and viewing
Totally.
things more as information instead of these like
Yeah.
loaded implications about our worthiness or about who we are as people.
Totally. And I think that the more that we orient to, because the other thing too is I imagine, you know, anybody that's listening to this, like if, you know, it's like, if we're having this conversation, then that means that like it's something there's something happening collectively around this, you know, and people learning what it even means to set boundaries and how to do that. And I think that oftentimes we can be so focused on the ways we feel like we're failing in the boundary setting, or the moments that we don't set the boundary and stuff, that we fail to see all the progress we've actually made. And I know that there's been so much progress made collectively in the way of learning how to set boundaries. And I know also for me personally that when I can focus more on the progress rather than on the ways I perceive that I'm like failing, then that actually exponentiates my growth in that arena, because I'm like, oh, cool, I'm celebrating that I set that boundary. That celebration feels good. And then that kind of like bolsters my system to be able to do it again, you know? Whereas if I perceive that I've failed and then I like, you know, judge myself or criticize myself, and then I shrink and then I feel shame, then it's like, then I can't possibly change from that place. And so yeah, letting there be both that compassion and grace, and then also orienting to the progress, I feel like actually really serves to exponentiate the benefits of that practice of setting boundaries.
Yeah. Oh, that's so important. And even if you notice that you didn't set a boundary, and like ideally you'd go back and you would, and you're beating yourself up about that, it's still a big deal that you're even thinking that you should have set a boundary, or that you think that that
Totally.
was a possibility for you to do in the first place.
Totally.
Still a huge step.
Huge. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Every tiny awareness and every tiny step is like equally worthy of celebration. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We have so much still that I guess we didn't cover. I want to talk about maybe our last thing as, well, I don't know. I just said a lot of words that didn't go in the same sentence.
Fine.
But I want to talk about how we can tend to our sobriety / mental health / recovery when we're in a busy, fast-paced world, especially like talking about urgency and rest.
Yeah.
Because rest is so important, but I feel like when people think about rest, they're like, but I have kids or I have a job. Like I can't rest for hours at a time, or like I can't tend to my well-being for hours at a time.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's such a common narrative and reality. And the thing that comes to mind when you share that is like it doesn't have to be hours at a time. You know, I think that sometimes it's really real that there are folks that are living a life that demands so much, and and that for many, you know, to have all that space can be and feel like a huge privilege. And you know, I'm also a mom to a 19-month-old, and I've certainly had my own journey with this, you know, in the last 19 months, because yeah, parenthood just takes so much of you. And what I've learned is that I needed to adjust the story that I was telling myself around rest, what rest was supposed to look like. And so I definitely, you know, had that where I would say, oh, well, I don't, you know, before I had my daughter, it's like I would spend, you know, sometimes 3 hours a day, like either going on a run and or going to yoga or in meditation or in my whatever and all this kind of stuff. And I had all this ample time to really tend to myself in ways that felt really great. And now there are just days where that's not 3 hours, you know, 3 hours, that's not even close to possible. But I do have 30 minutes Or I do have, 5 minutes in between this thing and next to slow down and take some conscious breaths. I think that sometimes we think that rest, needs to be this huge block of time, or self-care needs to be this huge block of time, but really self-care can happen on a moment to moment basis in so many ways. It's also nuanced, and so I'm not, I think there are like larger spaces for self-care that are absolutely required. And my intention in sharing this is that my hope is that folks can start to reframe for themselves what can be possible, because I know for me, I might want an hour of space and that's not possible, but even 5 minutes of a guided meditation or some deep breaths or some sort of embodiment practice can do wonders for my nervous system and support in down regulating and increasing my sense of ease, right? And so my hope is that can feel more available to folks, and that we can get creative about the way that we're thinking about that.
I like that so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could tell yourself anything like 7 or 8 years ago when you were trying to get in recovery or you're trying to get sober and you weren't quite there yet, what would you like her to know? Just put you on the spot with a small question.
Yeah. No, it's a good one. I don't know that I would, I certainly wouldn't tell her anything with the intention of trying to alter her path, because I think that I needed every experience that I had to get to where I am today. And I really trust that very deeply. And so I don't think that I would say anything in that way. I think that I honestly it would be less about what I would say and more about like just holding her in that space with so much love and so much compassion, and also reflecting to her her inherent goodness, because I think she really needed that. Like she had so much harshness and self-loathing, and wasn't able to really see the good, even though it's there in everybody, right? And so so I think it would be something around that.
And you're totally doing that for her now.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I love that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love for you to give our listeners a challenge or a resource to focus on this next week.
Yes, totally. Yeah, I suppose my challenge, I like, in keeping with kind of what we just talked about around the rest piece, is like a challenge could be to explore like how are we thinking about rest, and what are we thinking it needs to look like, and what could it possibly look like. What could 5 minutes of a restful activity look like, whether that's breath, or it's like going outside and like putting your feet in the dirt, and it could be so many things, but just being curious about what it means to incorporate more ease throughout our day, and even small moments. So that feels like a challenge for folks.
Yeah, that's such a great one. I love it.
Yeah.
And will you tell us about all the ways that we can work with you, and maybe where we could find you on social media, etc.?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I work with people one-on-one. I do, both sober / somatic coaching. It's a combination of, sober coaching and embodiment. It's embodiment centered always. And so that's one way to work with me. And then Embodied Recovery Community enrollment will be opening again at the end of March. And so that's another way. And then you can find me on social media. My personal account is at Halie Devlin, HALIE DEVLIN. And then also Embodied Recovery Community has an account that's all one word. And then my website is a place where you can find me too, and that's sacredgroundingwellness.com.
Awesome. I have to say that you're just so cool and I like you so much.
Oh, thank you. Yes, you too. Feeling is very mutual. Thank you so much for having me on here. It's been a real
Yeah,
joy.
thank you so much for coming. I think this topic was very, very much needed.
Good, good. I'm so glad. Yeah, I hope that it serves. Mhm.